Right, this is an exercise in using a limited palette to make a simple painting that's mostly about light and dark, tonal value, and temperature. So we're going to have two kind of scales to think about. There's going to be the kind of, think of a vertical scale, lightest to darkest, and then cutting through that from on the other axis, we're going to have coolest to warmest. What does that mean? It means you need three pigments. A cool one, in this case it's ultramarine, a warmer one, this is raw umber, and then titanium white, which is a value modifier here, which is going to lift the brightness. So theoretically, by adding that to either of these, you're going to go from darkest to lightest. But the scale of warmest to coolest is going to be achieved by mixing somewhere between these two. Hope that's clear. Right, I'm going to get in position and have a quick go showing you how this works. First off, I've got a tinted canvas. I've got a canvas that's just a bit grey, and that's largely so that it doesn't glare when I'm painting for a camera. I'm just copying shapes for the time being, giving myself something really simple to paint about. I think possibly I'll do a sort of Tony Hart type thing and not give away what I'm painting at this stage. It should just hopefully come together. The great Tony Hart. I'm sure many of you will remember him. Right, here we go. That's good. Okay, so just some simple shapes. I'm copying something. I've got a photograph by my side, and I'm just copying shapes, really thinking mostly about light and dark, and how the dark shapes kind of end where they end and give on to kind of light shapes. It's the contrast, the frontier between light and dark that's of interest, because that's really where the kind of the significant stuff happens. Okay, you probably already guessed what it is. Okay, so I'm just now going to look at the dark end of the value scale, which is going to be the pure pigments, the ultramarine or the raw umber, depending on whether it's a warm or a cool dark. And you might need to use a bit of imagination for that, because some things are so dark that you don't really get a lot of colour. You don't see a lot of colour, they just absorb all the light. So, I mean, in that case, I think I would just start by mixing the two together and putting a blob down, and then afterwards you can kind of adjust it, figuring out whether it needs to be more cool or warm, which is largely about the relationship with the neighbouring colours that you're going to put on. So this is a kind of a nothing colour in terms of its temperature, but it's just to help me mark out where those dark bits are. Just while I squint at the photograph and check that I'm getting roughly the right colours in the right places. Just a couple more to do, and then I'll move on. Often I paint on a white canvas. That's how they sell it. It's kind of easy. But if you're painting on a white canvas and you put down these touches of dark, that sort of gives you immediately the whole range of value that you're going to use in the painting, from lightest to darkest. Whereas if you're working from a middle ground like this, I think it's really important, once you put a few notes of dark value on, to find the other end of the scale as quickly as possible and lift out to the lightest parts of the picture. Again, thinking a little bit about temperature. I'm not the picture I've got here doesn't have like really clear warm and cool colours, so I'm just going to keep that simple for now and try and think of some areas, some local colours. This is a face, so this part here is being relatively warm, part of the face, part of the picture, and then where something is cool in terms of its local colour, like, well, we'll come to that. I'll just use the ultramarine to map out that cool end of the value scale, of the temperature scale. Yeah, so value, light to dark, temperature, in this case, blue to brown. If anyone's been watching or following my, it's unlikely, but if anyone's been following my Instagram thingy page, you'll probably see I've posted a couple of paintings about this this idea already. It's not a new idea, it's something that painters have done, you know, for donkey's years, and a great exponent of it was Ewan Uglow, who would use a palette a bit like this to make paintings at night, often from life, of models posing under artificial light. So it's quite a kind of a sepia quality to some of his paintings, and if you ever see a Ewan Uglow painting that's got that kind of sepia look to it, it's probably done with a temperature, tone, a value and temperature palette very similar to the one I'm using here, but obviously a lot better. Okay, hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. I'm marking out the lighter parts of the face, and possibly you can't see, but there's a little bit of variety in the temperature that I'm putting on here as well. I'm just starting to differentiate the warmest parts of the picture from the coolest parts, and that will happen from this point on all through the kind of value scale. So even the darks are now going to be cool dark or warm dark. Ask the question and try to come up with something that has a positive idea of temperature just as much as it has a positive idea of light and dark. Yeah. Da, 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 da. Okay. Another advantage of this palette is that you can go quite quickly because you don't have to think too hard about colour. Some of your choices are taken away from you, and all of the colours are really going to be some kind of combination of these same two or three of these colours, so brush cleaning time is cut down a bit too. Is that all in shot? Let me lift it. It's been falling while I've been painting. This has been falling slightly, and that's the limit of my technical kind of know-how, is to just have this kind of robot arm. I've been using this for teaching, but it does slip down a bit. Okay. Da, 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 da. I think one thing that's exciting about this is that just within the range of colours that you can produce between these two base kind of colours, the ultramarine and the raw umber, there's a huge range. Once you start putting them down next to each other, it exposes there's a huge range, even in a very, very small palette, very limited palette like this. And often, you know, if you're painting with a full palette and you've got all of the, if I've got all of the colours out, the cadmiums and stuff, the challenge is to fight down the colour. It always tries to kind of get too, you know, it mushrooms out. So sometimes I just kind of work with a small compressed sort of part of the palette like this, just to kind of keep everything in check. And then you can kind of take it the other way and focus on trying to make the most out of limited resources, which is kind of satisfying, fun thing to do, I feel. For me, there we go, I quite like this. Yeah. Da, 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 da. So I've been doing these live things on Instagram, thinking that I would afterwards be able to download the video and save it to YouTube or something, but I can't seem to get that to work, so I'm having to do this kind of just an ordinary recording, which is a bit weird for me. I prefer it when it's kind of live. And you can leave bits if you're working on a grey tinted or even a brown tinted palette canvas. you can leave bits unpainted. I mean, you can do that anyway if it's white, but it's a lot easier with this kind of support to leave parts of the picture unpainted and just let that grey that's underneath do some of the work. So it's not so different from the colours I'm mixing here, so I shouldn't have to cover it all, I wouldn't think. Okay. Still okay? Still in shot? Yep. Good. This is cool. Now, coming to an interesting part here, which is something in the picture which is really objectively quite cool. It's kind of an extreme. It's a blue jumper. Oh, I gave away that this is a jumper. This is a face of a jumper. Right, but anyway, this is a place where you can really push the colour to the limits of what's available, knowing that it's an outlier and it's not going to kind of run out of scale or prevent you from painting something more blue elsewhere. And the same would be true of anything that was like really warm. I think just using the raw umber on its own, I mean, raw umber is not a very warm colour, but it just going to the extreme of the scale somewhere enables you to kind of mark out the whole range of the territory. There we go. Can you see? So I'm looking to see if I missed out any of the big important shapes using this fairly big brush to make kind of fairly crude shapes. I mean, I quite like the shapes to be crude, to be honest. I don't think a painting necessarily has to go from big brushes down to small brushes. In fact, I think probably ought to do the opposite in some ways. But definitely there are bits of this that are going to need a little bit more close attention, and I'll switch to using something smaller in a moment. There we go. So these are some of the warmest bits. You can see here and here are outliers. They are the kind of equivalents of the coolest outliers there, and it just begins to kind of you kind of disclose the whole range of available colours that way, and it helps you to slot the other ones, more ambiguous ones, into place. I'd be really interested to know if anyone can tell what I'm painting at this stage. Actually, I think maybe it might be a slightly cultural thing here. I think British people might have a better chance. People who've lived in England or Britain. Sorry about that. That's my cultural bias is showing. Okay. I mean, I guess Scotland too. Okay. Yeah. Wales, etc. Northern Ireland, Isle of Man, and so on. It's things like that that make me think I'm probably going to delete this. Why do I say these things? Anyway. Working with a slightly incomplete picture, so I'm trying to guess really what's happening up here. I think that comes down like that, that goes across there like that. Probably goes cool again, just here. Cool being blue. I've got a little bit of solvent by my side here, so I am wiping the brush through every time I mix a colour. If I've got a very different one coming up, if it's either got more or less white in it, or if it's a very different temperature, I tend to keep the brush clean. It's best to wipe it off on a kind of cotton rag, something soft, so you don't damage the bristles too much. That way. And I have another brush now, a little pointy one. I'll try and, without getting too particular, trying to just find a few more decisive pieces of drawing, kind of slightly more determined pieces of drawing, that's what I'm meant to say. Determined, yeah, that's the word. Strangely, but there we go. And a lot of guessing is going to be involved, even if you're painting from life and you've got all of the colours visible in front of you, and you're not trying to figure out what colours are in the shadows, because warm and cool shadows tend to be a bit clearer, easier to determine when you're working from life. But when you're working from a photo, often the shadows will just be black, because it's that's how, you know, most of I'm not an expert about photography, but I'm pretty sure that it tends towards all the colour saturation being in the middle of the value range. Lights tend to kind of get closer to white, darks tend to get closer to black. And I think because you can see so much more light and dark in real life using your own eyes, and by changing the exposure as you look, and your eyes' physical changes, you can actually probably work out much more easily when things are warm darks and cool darks. The sensitivity is much greater. So working from a photo, I'm sort of guessing. I'm sort of using the local colour as a guide as well. If it's a warm local colour like this, I'm making a warm shadow and seeing how it looks. Okay, that goes down. How much longer have I got? Another 5 minutes. I might extend it slightly, depending on how it looks. Same with this little brush, I'm switching between all the colours, just trying to stay in control of unintended mixing by keeping an eye on how it goes on and cleaning it if it looks like it's going on dirty. Should be a bit more arched. Right. Warm darks are going to cover a range of things you might see. There'd be browns, there'd be dark reds, might even be kind of warm greens at times that I think I'd start putting the raw umber down for. But generally speaking, I think things like greens, purples, blues, greys, I'm gonna consider those cool and use the ultramarine. Even if it means putting slightly unnatural looking colours here and there. It's again not about making an exact copy of the colour, which it never is. I mean, that's never the point, never it's never possible really. It's a kind of fiction that you can end up believing in at times, but the goal is to just make a series of relationships that are equivalent in some way to the relationships that you see when you're looking at the subject. And so if the thing feels like a change from cool to warm, here to here, then you just use the resources you've got, and that might involve a bit of translation from, you know, it's like having a filter, I suppose, on a lens. but having to do it in your head. Can you see what it is yet? I expect some will know. It's been 20 minutes. Just bring that across there. Also things like pinks, colours that are, you could possibly think of them as being cool versions of warm colours. The pink, I guess you could think of it as being like a chalky version of a red, and it's definitely less warm than orange. It's a place where you have to make a choice, I think, really, depending on the neighbouring colours. I guess pink is more likely to read as, generally speaking, warm and therefore raw umber, but contextually it might be more appropriate to use the blue. Because I think the exciting thing about this palette is once you give up on making naturalistic colour choices, you've already kind of committed to make something really odd looking, and you might as well just embrace it. Push the colour as far as you can. Oh, that's not very good. Better. It's falling down again, isn't it? Almost there. Really, I need to slow down a bit. I'll go to half an hour. maybe I'll edit it before I put it on the YouTube. Well, maybe I shouldn't do that. Really, I don't know if it gives a misleading idea if you edit stuff. And this is not like I'm not aiming to do presentationally great videos here. It's just I wanted to share a little bit about the some of the different ways I go about painting, the kind of stuff I do when I'm demonstrating for a class sometimes. And I guess I don't really want to mislead. Also, it's kind of a faff to edit stuff. I'm not an expert. That should be longer. Almost there, I think. I'm not really a presenter, to say the least. I have to say, I've never really lost that. I mean, I was talking about Tony Hart earlier. It just popped into my head. There's ways. There's kind of be set to music, and he'd be painting something or drawing something, and he'd not let on what it was. Obviously, then it would just build up, and there'd be a moment where it would switch from being, 2D and like something he'd made, and it would just kind of become really magical. Become something else altogether. I really love that, the way he'd do that. I think it's still very much what's in half of the pleasure, at least, of painting, is something like that, seeing this moment when things change and you kind of go through from looking at it, and you kind of you get the idea, you just kind of clarify this eye. There's a sort of a sardonic eye that I'm missing here. Just a little bit of character in this corner. And I would say that most of the time it's helpful if you, when you're painting eyes and details in general, or anything, if you've got a source image that's flat, if you're working from a photograph particularly, you could turn it around and have a look at it on its side, and then have a look at the other picture, the target or the source image on its side. Oh, it's going the other way. It'll show you much more clearly whether you're getting things right, because I find I just get used to looking at what I've painted, and probably I'm correcting for all of the mistakes that I'm making as I go along, and this shakes things up a little bit. That's one of the reasons I don't always really love painting from photos, is that I think it's very hard to shake things up and refresh your perception. I get very, maybe it's just me, I get very burnt out from looking at one picture for too long. I don't see anything new in it after a while. And this is one way you can kind of fight against that if you're finding you have that problem. Ooh, I like it though. That's not too bad. Again, not grumpy exactly, sardonic, definitely not. No, this is in the wrong place. The eyebrow should be up here somewhere. And it's fallen again, hasn't it? Okay, that's it. That's been 30 minutes. And if I've not got it right now, I don't think I'm ever going to, so I'll just probably stop presently. Too dark. Yep, it's Barry Cryer with, I think he's got his finger up his nose. I think he has. So for those of you who spotted that, congratulations. It goes out that way a bit more. Yeah, maybe. It comes in a bit more. This is in here a bit more. I mean, tiny things like that are probably of interest only to me, but I guess that's how I move on with the painting usually in everyday life. It's just by kind of annoying myself with lots of tiny changes, and then scraping the whole thing down happens quite a lot, and then hopefully when you restate it, put paint on again, it's going to be a little bit more informed and in the right place. Slightly more. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thanks very much for watching, and see you again soon.